Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mark Moss Show, where we're always talking about the decentralized revolution, talking about the way that the world is changing. Yes, through the very lens of politics, finance, and technology. That's the way that it brings better context to what is going on. And we have a lot to cover today. I'm excited about this. It's a topic that I love to talk about. I talk about all the time, and that is money. Money touches every single aspect of our lives. Now, there's a quote from the Bible that's often misunderstood or misused, and it said that money is the root of all evil. But that is not what the Bible says. That quote is taken out of context. It says that the love of money is the root of all evil. So what does that mean? It's that when we love money more than anything else, we'll do anything to get money, rob, kill, steal, whatever it is. That's the problem. If the love of money being above everything else. And so we're supposed to love other people and use money to love other people. Unfortunately, what people do today is they use other people and love money. It's the opposite. So I love to talk about money. I'm not saying I love money. It's not the root of my evil. But it's an interesting topic, and it touches every area of our life. Now, I like to focus on money because after having made a lot of money and losing it, I realize how bad that is. I want to try to prevent other people from making the same mistakes that I've made. Don't make the same mistakes that I've made. But I also think about it because it touches every area of our lives. And, you know, when I was trying to rebuild things, it was really from a purely selfish standpoint. And once I made a little bit more money, then it starts to be a little more philanthropic. But really, I like to focus on money specifically for me because it gives me and my family and my friends and loved ones more options, and I can help more people. Now, the helping more people is an important piece. I want to talk about what just happened. We just had the 53rd anniversary of a really, really, really big event that changed money as we know it. So I'm going to break that down, the anniversary that just happened, breaking money as we know it, how we got there, we're back into that. Then we're going to look at the problems that it's caused, and then where we go from there. All right. So that's what we're going to cover in the show, but I was just going to tell you, one thing that I find that breaks the grip of materialism is giving. And so I love money, but as I said, I want money for myself, my friends, my family, for more options for them, but also so I can help other people. And so by helping other people, you'll start to break that grip of materialism or that grip of money over your life. But let's dig into the topic that we're going to discover right now, which is what just happened, or I should say, what was the anniversary that just happened that showed or really was the anniversary of when money became broken and has caused since then. So there's a couple quotes that I want to pull out. One of my favorite books I recently just recommended to Q, my show producer, to read, and he did. I've read it many times. I recommend you read it as well. And it's a book written called The Law. Very simple title and a very simple book. It's like a booklet. You can read it in about an hour. Highly recommend it. Go on Amazon right now while you're listening to me and buy it. But Frederick Bastiat wrote this book a couple hundred years ago. And there's a quote in there. He says, when plunder, so like stealing and theft, when plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men in a society, over the course of time, they create for themselves a legal system that authorizes it and a moral code that glorifies it. So what he's talking about is legal plunder. So plunder, again, being theft, stealing, right? So when plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men in a society. So you might say that the leaders of this society have gotten there so that that's their way of life. It's why you look at Nancy Pelosi or President Obama coming in broke. I mean, President Obama was a community organizer. He had no money going into the presidency. Now he's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Nancy Pelosi is like the best Wall Street trader in history. And you can look at most of these politicians, they've followed the same path. They go in penniless, they work on a public servant salary, and then they're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It's a way of life for them. All right, a group of men, a group of people in society. Now, over the course of time, they continue to create for themselves a legal system that authorizes it. So we have insider trading laws. Good old Martha Stewart, helps people with their cooking or whatever home decoration. She got brought up on insider trading and had to do prison time. Like, could you imagine Martha Stewart in prison, like in her prison garbs or whatever she has to wear? I don't know if she's wearing bright orange or whatever, but that doesn't apply to the group of men in society that have built that in for themselves. So that's why Nancy Pelosi is like the best stock trader on earth. So they're literally passing laws that affect certain industries and businesses and things like that, and they're using that insider information that they have to get themselves rich. Now, what this quote says, they create for themselves a legal system that authorizes it. So the legal system says you, Martha Stewart, you, me, we're not allowed to trade with any insider information. Not that we have it anyway, but if you did, you can't use it or you go to jail like Martha Stewart. But that's the system they created. But for them, they not only do they pass the laws that affect the outcomes, but they get to trade on the information as well. And over and over and over and over, of course, people like you and I, we're not happy about that. As a matter of fact, we're outraged by it. And so over and over and over, we see that it comes up to, voting blocks, et cetera. And they, of course, they strike it down every single time. Because over the course of time, back to the quote, they create for themselves a legal system that authorizes it. And so they authorize that. Now, we can see other things. The last part here says authorize it, and a moral code that glorifies it. So now what are we seeing? We're seeing like John Kerry. He's like the climate czar. He's flying all around the world in his private jet. We got Bill Gates flying all the way around, all around the world in his private jet, telling people that they need to sacrifice their use of energy. They, you and I, the other people, you can't use gas stoves anymore. Cows are bad. You shouldn't be driving as much because of the climate. And someone asked Bill Gates recently, or John Kerry, Bill Gates specifically, and they said, how can you justify telling all these people they need to reduce their energy, but yet you're flying all around in your private jet? And he said, well, that's because I'm doing good with it. Okay, so back to the quote. Create a system for themselves that a legal system that authorizes it, and a moral code that glorifies it. So now, because they're public servants doing this public good, the morality is that they're allowed to steal. The morality of Bill Gates to say, well, because I'm doing good with it, because I give billions of dollars to climate change initiatives, then I'm allowed to go do this. They create this moral code for that. So that's what's going on. But how did we get here? Now, this was a warning, again, like I said, from Frederick Bastiat hundreds of years ago. But so we knew that we would go down this path, but it didn't stop. There was another quote from Marty Bent. He's a Bitcoin podcaster, friend. I've been on his show a couple times. He's been on my show as well. He said, when looting is normalized at the highest levels of society, it will eventually flow to and normalize at the lowest levels of society. The culture is broken, and it starts at the top of the power structure. So, of course, that's how it starts. So anyone who's ever run a business already knows this, and if you haven't run a business, you might know this as well. But in a business, you have lots of people working there, and it's important to have a company culture. And this is the values that the business has, the way that they treat each other, the way that they help each other, the way that they treat customers, the image they project out to the public, all these different things. And the really, really good businesses that have excelled, Zappos, the online shoe company, was like an example of this. Southwest always been a good example of this, is they have very, very strong culture. But the culture is set from the top. It's the leadership that intentionally designs the culture, and they have to live that out. There's a saying that says the fish stinks from the head down. And so if the leadership is good and have designed good culture, the company does very well. And if they are bad, then the company does very badly. And back to kind of what this quote says, when looting is normalized at the highest levels of society, it will eventually flow down and normalize the lowest levels of society. And that's exactly what's happened. You can look back to the founding fathers of the United States, and I mean, these people came over here risking their life for the benefit of future generations. They signed the Declaration of Independence. Most of those people ended up dead, and it wasn't a good death. And they did that sacrifice for future generations. And so that became normalized to the lowest level. Everybody was doing something for the future benefit of others. But today, we have a system where, as Frederick Bastiat said, a group of men in society created a system to legally steal, legal plunder. And so now we see the leadership at the top, the Nancy Pelosi's, the Obamas, out for themselves. And that has what's now been normalized down to the lowest level. But it was something that happened back in 1970 that really kicked this into gear. And that's what I want to talk about specifically, because that's when what we say, the bus came off the rails or whatever. And that was Richard Nixon doing something. Now, how do we protect ourselves from all of this legal plunder? Well, one way is to not have all your money in the banking system. And one of the best ways to do that for 5,000 years has been by buying gold. Now, buying gold has its risks, and that's why I like to use trusted vendors, trusted third parties. I work with a company called Universal Coin and Bullion. They have great prices on the most popular silver and gold bullion coins, but I also trust them because I've worked with Mike Fulgen. He's the UCB's president. And he wrote the consumer alert on gold coins for the Texas Attorney General. So they got great prices. They're trustworthy. That's why I like to use them. And he has a very special offer for my listeners where he wants to give you the most popular gold bullion coin in the world. It's a 1-ounce gold American Eagle coin. He wants to give it to you at his dealer cost and even pay for the shipping, and send you his 30-page gold award-winning guide at the same time. If you mention me, give him a call, 1-800-UCB-GOLD. Again, 1-800-UCB-GOLD. Mention Mark Moss, or you can go online to universalcoin.com/Mark Moss and take advantage of that. President Richard Nixon removed the dollar from the gold standard. All right, from the gold standard. Now, what does that even mean? Well, that means that gold had been money for 5,000 years. In 1944, the whole world agreed to go on what's called the Bretton Woods Agreement, where the dollar would be backed by gold. That means, let me explain that for a second. That's a misunderstood term. The dollar was backed by gold. What does that mean to be backed by? Well, the reason why it's backed is debt has to be backed. If you buy a house and you have a loan, that loan is backed by the house. So if you stop paying your debt, they have the house. So debt has to be backed by something. So gold was money. They gave us a paper gold certificate, an IOU. That paper IOU, that gold certificate was backed by the gold in the bank. At any time I want, I can go take that paper certificate, that IOU, and reclaim the gold for it. It was backed by the gold in the bank. If I gave it to you, you could go claim the gold. Okay, so that dollar was backed, that debt instrument was backed by the gold in the bank. But only debt needs to be backed by something. So a lot of times you hear people talk about Bitcoin. Well, what's Bitcoin backed by? Well, you obviously don't understand how money works to even ask that question. So no matter what I tell you, probably won't matter. But only debt must be backed by something. I would just reply with, well, what's Bitcoin backed by? I don't know. What's gold backed by? What's oil backed by? Right? Oil is just oil. Now, oil has value because we give it value because of its utility. Gold has value because we assign it value because of its utility, but only if it's used in that utility does it have value. So, for example, if I'm on a deserted island and I have no food, no water, no boat, no phone, no way to get off that island, and I have $1 billion worth of cash, $1 billion worth of gold, and $1 billion worth of Bitcoin, and $1 billion worth of oil, whatever, none of that's worth anything to me. I can't utilize it. The utility is gone. The only thing that I would want at that point would be food and water and maybe a boat and a phone to get off the island. Those would be the only things worth anything. Last night at dinner, I had some water I didn't finish drinking and it got poured out. It was worthless to me. But on a deserted island, I'd probably give that $1 billion of gold or whatever for that water. So that's how that works. So there's a little sidetrack on that. So anyway, gold was money. They issued the dollars. But what happened in 1971 is that he severed the ties of that. And what happened is that it threw the whole world into a tailspin because the dollar was backed by gold and all the currency of the world were pegged to the dollar. And when he removed that, then we no longer had any sort of anchor, and all we had was just free-floating currency that they could just print unlimited. Now, when they print unlimited, they do that in order to, as Bastiat said, create a system that legally allows them to plunder. So right now, if the government wants money, they have two choices. Remember, the government doesn't create anything. The government cannot give something it has not taken. So whenever you want the government to give you something, a new benefit, healthcare, college education, whatever that may be, fill in the blank, they can't give you something if they haven't taken it from somebody else. Just let that sink in for a second. So how does the government get things? Well, they take them, but they can only take so much. If they take too much, the whole system falls apart. So they take it through taxation, obviously. You got to pay your taxes. And of course, there's income taxes, there's property taxes, Social Security taxes, all kinds of taxes. And so that's the main way they do that. The problem is like I said, if they raise those taxes too high, then there's a revolt. They can get to about 50%, and that's probably about it. Now, The other thing that they can do, because again, they can only tax so high, then they steal arbitrarily and secretly, and they do that through inflation. So by printing a lot of money, they're stealing the value out of your existing currency. So you have 100,000 currency units, $100,000 in the bank 10 years ago. Today, you still have 100,000 currency units, $100,000 in the bank. But the problem is, 10 years ago, those things bought you a much bigger house than they buy you today. So even though the same currency units are there, they stole the value from that. Now, people don't like that. And so people are unhappy. They want to revolt. We also see, back to kind of the point, the legal plunder. We don't like that. We don't like the insider trading. We see all the grift and theft that's going on. And so we see the corruption that's there. And so people start to push back on that. And as things continue to get more corrupt, through the money system, corrupting things, people push back, and so then the government has to crack down even more. And so they pass laws, like, for example, the Bank Secrecy Act, passed in 1970. Now, of course, it's for your protection. It was passed in 1970 to combat money laundering. And, of course, they've changed it many, many times, most recently in 2020. But since 1970, they've changed it a bunch of times to address different sets of problems that they see, such as cryptocurrencies, for example. They pass things that require financial institutions to report what they call suspicious activity, or suspicious activity reports, or what they call them SARS reports. So there are certain things that would trigger these, like large cash transactions, deposits, wire transfers, things like that. Now, the banks have quotas on how many of these SARS reports they're supposed to fill out, and the Biden crime family supposedly had, like, I didn't look it up, hundreds of these, maybe even thousands, I forget, but lots of SARS reports filed against them for all of their banking transactions they were doing. But of course, that was never investigated. But we have all these things, the Bank Secrecy Act. We have things like KYC, Know Your Customer, where they have to get all your ID information. We have things like AML, anti-money laundering. Of course, in 2001, they passed the Patriot Act. That was the day, obviously the Twin Towers attacked in September 11 was catastrophic, and a few thousand people, Americans, died. That was a horrible situation. But it was also the day that most of our freedom died. When they passed the Patriot Act, of course, they call it the Patriot Act. It's always named almost like the opposite of what they're giving you, sort of like when they created the Inflation Reduction Act by printing trillions of dollars. But this Patriot Act took away our freedoms, with lots of ways they could do that. But ultimately what it all comes down to is surveillance and control, and it's this all-seeing eye of Sauron. They have to be able to see everything. They have to be able to control everything so they can control any sort of uprising against them, but of course all in the name of safety. Now, since this has happened, I'm not even talking about the fraud and legal plunder part, but just since we've left the gold standard, it started to tear the fabric of society apart because of the money being broken. We've seen a lot of things happen in regards to that. And mainly it all comes down to decreasing the quality of your life. So, for example, since 1971, when we got off the gold standard, we've seen productivity grow by almost 250%. But worker compensation, or wages, only grew by 115%. We've seen a 50-plus year decline in wages as a share of the economy's total income. So basically, in layman's terms, what that means is prices are getting more expensive and you're not making more money, which means the quality of your life is going down. We've seen real GDP, gross domestic product, per capita go up, while the median male income stayed flat, right? So the cost of living is going up, but your wages aren't. Median female income trended with median male income during the same time. So we don't really need to break that apart. It's about the same thing. And what happens when that happens? Well, when wages are going up, when cost of living is going up, but my wages are staying flat, then I have to work more. So now I have to work more hours to have the same quality of life, which means hours of my life are now being taken. So what do we do to combat that? Well, now 2 people in the household have to work. So now we have 2 couples working. What happens from there? Well, now instead of one person being home with the kids, now both people are gone, and so now the state gets to raise the kids. Now the parents don't have a good relationship with the kids. Now, because both people are working, now they're both stressed out. They don't have good relationships. So then what happens? Well, then we have high divorce rate. The number one cause of divorce, I believe, is money, right? Fighting over money. You can't make enough money. We're stressed out over money. We're not spending enough time together. We don't get to go on vacations together because we can't afford it. We don't have any money. We've seen median home prices balloon as inflation continues to be a more, bigger and bigger problem. We're seeing banking crises happen. Obviously, the U.S. national debt is ballooning as well. We've seen the incarceration rate go up. I mean, think about that. The incarceration rate. Why? Well, because when it's harder to live, when my cost of living goes down, then maybe I'll turn to stealing and theft. Maybe because I'm growing up without parents at home and I'm just left to fend for myself, I join gangs and things like that. And so this starts to break down society. And I know that goes a little bit deep philosophically, but you have to kind of think about how big of an impact these things have. I like to think of it like a tree. So that's sort of the way I describe it. If you think of like this giant oak tree that maybe has like thousands of leaves on it, and we could sit there on this oak tree and I could pull one leaf at a time, and each leaf represents like one problem in society. The obesity rate, the incarceration rate, the theft, the theft rate, murder rate, any of these things. And each of these leaves is a problem, but they are all attached to a tree. And at the bottom of the tree is a root. And at that root sits the money printer. The ability for the government to just print endless amounts of money in this fiat debt-based monetary system that we're in creates all these distortions that we have, including, like I said, even the obesity rate. So why the obesity rate? Well, because good food is too expensive. People can't afford that. Now we got to make cheaper food. In order to make cheaper food, we have to come up with all types of fillers and fake ingredients to put in there. Then it causes all types of health problems. Each one of those leaves on the tree goes back to the root. But it also changed what we know as money. And this is a very key piece. Especially if you want to get more money in your life, you need to understand this. If you're going to play a game, you'd want to know what the game is and how it works and what the rules are and things like that. And so we live in what's called a debt-based monetary system. So we went from a money system that was based off of a commodity, where gold had been money, a commodity, to now just this free-floating currency that's based off of debt. And so we talk about the central banks printing money, money printer go burr, which is kind of like a fun meme, but it's not really how it works, right? The central banks create the monetary policy, but the banks create money through lending. When you take a loan for a house, a car, a boat, whatever, that money is created into existence. So we're in a debt-based monetary system. Now, there's a couple things that means. One, it means that if you want to get really rich, you got to use a lot of debt because the money is created through debt. Meaning, when you go get a loan to go buy a new investment property or whatever that may be, that money is created for you. So the more debt you can take on, the more money is created on your behalf. So you have to understand how that works. But what it also means is that when you take on debt, we like to call that like leverage. I can leverage these assets by taking debt to get them. The problem, leverages could be really good. It helps me grow way faster. If I am starting a business, I can go get a loan and buy 3 new service trucks so I can get my crews going out to fix people's houses. And I can grow my business faster because I can leverage the debt. But leverage works both ways. So I like to think of leverage as like fire. I can warm my house, I can cook my food, but it can also burn my house down. And so just as fast as the economy grows with debt, it can also be torn back down. And what we're seeing is the governments of the world are using debt to try to stimulate the economy. The United States, we just had our debt ceiling debate a month or two ago. And, of course, they agreed to not reduce the debt, to not reduce the spending. And as a matter of fact, all the spending increases that happened after the pandemic, going from about $4.8 trillion to about $6.5 trillion, that's now baked in. That's the new level that we'll be spending at. And so it requires massive amounts of debt to do that in order to continue to kind of goose the economy, to continue to get the economy to grow. But the problem is that now we're in the system that the debt always has to continue to grow. You might have heard you can't taper a Ponzi scheme. So we're sort of like in this Ponzi scheme where even President Biden himself said it, is that the U.S. can't default on its debt. The U.S. always pays its bills. This is in the debt ceiling debate. They have to increase the debt ceiling so we don't default on our debt. But so what he's saying is we have to take on more debt to pay off the existing debt, sort of like a Ponzi scheme. And so we're in a system that can't be tapered. But this is how we loot from each other. This is how we steal from each other. Like I said, this is how they steal. But it's also how the system is destroyed. So there's a quote from Vladimir Lenin, the leader of Russia during the Bolshevik Revolution in the early 1900s. And, of course, he was not a capitalist. He was a communist. And he said that the best way to destroy capitalism, which he wanted to destroy that system, would be to debauch the currency, would be to destroy it. Well, how did he say you destroy it? He said destroy capitalism by debauching the currency through inflation. So through a series of inflation, you can arbitrarily steal the money, is what he said. And then you can change the relationship of money to the point that it's lost, the relationship is lost, and the best way to get rich is through gambling and theft. And so that's what we see today. Lots of stealing and lots of gambling. So today, the hot thing is, trading. It was trading cryptocurrencies or trading options on Robinhood. Now you're trading AI stocks, whatever. Everyone's trying to gamble. I coach people through their investing process to try to help them come up with good decisions to make. But they always want to come back with the best way to gamble. Like, go to Vegas if you want to do that. But investing has now turned into gambling because that's what's happened to the currency system. And we constantly see new scams and new schemes popping up over and over and over because the best way to get rich is through gambling. At least that's how it looks. And I guess you got to do something because the cost of living is going up so fast that you can barely keep your head above water. So, for example, in 1971, if you would have bought what you could have bought with $100 in 1971, like a basket of goods, how much you could buy in 71 with $100 would take $722 today. $722. That's a big deal. Median houses used to be, new houses, 1971 were $25,000. The average house, $25,000 today, $500,000. It's a big deal. How do you keep up with that? You have to work harder, longer. You have to spend more time away from your life and more time chasing money in order to grow. We saw, other things that have shot up. The average car in 1971 was $3,500. The average tuition at Harvard was $2,600 per year. I'm not sure what Harvard tuition is, but the average tuition now is like over $60,000 a year, from $2,600 to $2,600 to $60,000 a year. A movie ticket was $1.50 in 1971. Today, a movie ticket is at least $15 in Los Angeles. I don't know where you're at. Gasoline was 40 cents a gallon, and today gas is over $5 a gallon in California. I was talking with someone a few nights ago, and they were saying, yeah, but don't you realize that debt is actually the oldest money that we've ever had? Because we've had lots of currencies. Before the dollar was the pound. Before that it was different currencies by Spain, by the Netherlands. Before that we had rocks and feathers. There's lots of things that have been money. But he said, actually, the oldest form of money is debt. It's not new. So he's saying you're making the case that this debt-based system is new, but debt is actually the oldest system in the world. So what does he mean by that? So first of all, I would agree with him, but there's some nuance that he's lacking and you're lacking potentially if you don't understand this. So what he's saying is before rocks and feathers and seashells, I might come over to your field and help you plow your field in exchange for you coming and helping me plow my field later. So I've extended you my labor on credit, knowing that you're going to give me labor back. Let's say that I had my harvest, and I decide that I'm going to give you, I'm going to loan you some of my crop. That's on credit, and you're going to give me back some of your chickens when they hatch later. All right. So that's you might consider it a barter system, but maybe it wasn't always one for one. Maybe it's I give you the crops today, you give me the chickens later. So he's absolutely right that debt was the first system. But the reason why that's different than the system that we have today is because there's two types of credit. Ludwig von Mises, one of the fathers of the Austrian School of Economics, wrote this out. And he talked about the differences of credit, one being circulation credit and one being commodity credit. All right. So commodity credit is when I give you credit on a commodity, on something real. So, for example, I create the crops. I plant them, I grow them, I harvest them. I have a commodity, the wheat, and I give you some. So I say I have 10 bushels of wheat. I sell 8 bushels of the wheat, and I give you 2 on credit. Okay, that's commodity credit. And the reason why that's important to understand is because that's credit based off of me withholding. I went without so you could have. I've delayed my gratification in order for future gratification. All right? That's commodity credit. And so he's absolutely right. Credit does predate it, but it was all commodity credit. And the reason why it's important is, like I said, it comes from real assets. It comes from savings. It comes from me delaying the gratification that I want. The problem that we have today is we're not using commodity credit anymore. Now we use what's called circulating credit, as Mises calls it. And so what that means is that now the government, or not the government, specifically the banks, create the circulation credit when you want to buy the house, the car, the boat, etc. And that money is created into existence. But that money did not come from anybody withholding that. So it'd be one thing if I bought 2 cars. I don't really need 2 cars anymore. So here, you go ahead and take one of these cars on credit. Just pay me $500 a month for it. That came from me expending real assets, and I'm giving it to you by me withholding it versus them printing the money and creating it out of thin air. And what that does is it pulls the value from the future. So it's a big difference. It's a really, really big difference. So one of the big differences, there's a lot of differences, but one of the big differences as I set up into how do we protect ourselves is that as they continue to print more currency units through issuing debt, the supply of those currency units, the amount of dollars in existence goes up, and that's inflation, like a balloon. If I blow up a balloon, I'm increasing the volume of air in that balloon. When they print money through debt, they increase the volume of currency in the circulation. What that does is more dollars in circulation then lowers the purchasing power of those currency units. The prices go up, and the value of those dollars go down. It's an inverse relationship. And so every time they do that, my existing dollars go down, my purchasing power goes down. So what do we do about that? Well, we have to figure out a way where our savings can go up with or hopefully beat inflation. So they're stealing, the stated goal is to only steal 2% per year. Maybe we don't care too much if they steal 2% per year. Of course, we know inflation, CPI, measures inflation, consumer price index, got up to 9%. So they way overshot the goal. So now you're losing 9% of your wealth. Now, that's not too bad in the United States. In Argentina, they're losing triple-digit inflation. It's like 112% or 115%, I don't know, it changes all the time, per year. That's how much the government's stealing through this inflation. But in the U.S., it's not so bad. 2% is the target. Right now, we're at just a little over 3%. Well, that's the reported numbers, if you believe that. That's all they want to steal. So then I have to make sure that my wealth is growing faster than the rate that they're stealing it. It's like sort of like you have a bucket full of water and you have a hole at the bottom of the bucket. How big is that hole? How much water is going out? If it's a pinhole and it's slowly leaking, or maybe it's a little tiny hole and it's leaking a little bit faster, but I have a hose going in at the top, it's okay. I'm filling it up faster than it's leaking. But the problem is when that hole's too big and it's not coming in fast enough. So how do we do that? Well, one, you need to make sure that you're making income that can meet or exceed the cost of inflation. Now, if you're working for a wage, as we talked about, a lot of wages haven't kept up with inflation. That's a big problem. If you have a business, most likely you're able to increase your prices at your business to keep up with inflation. So you're able to control that a little bit. Through investments, we can also invest in ways that can keep up with inflation. So, for example, if I invest into rental properties, I can continue to raise my rents. So my rents continue to go up as inflation goes up. So you want to make sure that you're where you get your income from, first of all, can keep up with inflation. Then, when I put my money that I've earned into savings, or you'd call them investments, I want to make sure those investments go up. Now, If you think about it, if I'm storing it in dollars, but they're continuing to print more, those dollars I'm saving are losing 2% a year. Something like Bitcoin, on the other hand, has no inflation, so there will never be more than 21 million. So there's no leaking. It's like a battery that can store my wealth that doesn't leak. It's like a bucket I can store my water that doesn't have a hole in it. So that's better. So we want to be in assets that can go up with inflation or more specifically, beat the cost of inflation. It's the only way to do that. Now, some other ways that we could do this, obviously that's kind of selfishly back to kind of like protecting myself, my friends, my family. On a bigger scale, we can continue to talk about these types of subjects. Take what you've learned today, go discuss it with somebody. Create awareness around it. Maybe we can change the bigger picture. Maybe we can take some of this and take it to the elections. These next elections, we have Biden and Trump running. Neither one of them probably want to do anything about what's happening with inflation. Trump leaned on the Fed just as hard as Biden had to print more money. But we do have candidates like Vivek Ramaswamy on the right. RFK Jr. on the left, who are talking about going back to sound monetary and fiscal policies. Even RFK is talking about backing the dollar with some gold and Bitcoin at some point. So another way is to continue to talk about these ideas, continue to create awareness about these ideas, and try, even though maybe it's a little bit discouraging, try our best to maybe also influence things on the political scale. Now, we have some hope because we can see in Argentina, going back to Argentina, their pain is very high because inflation is so high, but they have a candidate right now leading the polls who's running on a platform to get rid of the central bank, to stop printing money, to go back to a sound money standard. And if they can vote themselves that, then I think there's hope for us in the United States. And I say that because there's a quote I was going to read to you earlier. There's a quote that says, no democracy, democracy can't exist as a permanent form of government because people will always vote themselves more. The majority always votes for the candidate promising the most benefits. I believe that to be true, except for what we're seeing in Argentina is actually the opposite. They're actually voting for a candidate running on a platform to stop all this government spending. So that's how we protect ourselves. Hopefully that makes sense. If you just tune in, you're listening to The Mark Moss Show. If you've missed any of this, you can catch me on the podcast. Just go search The Mark Moss Show on your favorite podcast player. Go to YouTube to the Market Disruptors channel. You can watch me. You can listen to me there as well. But that's what we got. That's all I have right now. Thanks so much for listening.